Good afternoon, everyone. This is a school committee policy subcommittee meeting. We have a long agenda today, and the first item of business will be review and approval of the minutes of the October 18th policy review subcommittee meeting. Have other subcommittee members had an opportunity to review the minutes from October 18th?
Yes.
Okay, would someone like to move them?
I'll move the minutes. Approval.
All right, do we have a second? Thank you, Andy. Your vote, Valerie?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. So that will bring us to our first substantive agenda item for today's meeting, which is an update on school admissions policy considerations. And I'm bringing this back onto the agenda for today because we had a discussion on this policy, a first read of it at the full school committee meeting a couple weeks back. And at that meeting, the one area that we were still unsure on was about how to handle the 3 months residency requirement issue, the 3-month minimum. I had reached out to town council, and as of the last full school committee meeting, I did not have a response, but I have since received a response, and I would like to read it to the other members. Hi, David. My recollection is that the 3-month rule was established in response to the number of families who are only temporarily living in the town, visiting for various purposes, such as medical care, short-term college or university appointments, etc., and seeking to enroll their children in PSB. Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 76, Section 5, states in relevant part that, quote, every person shall have a right to attend the public schools of the town where he actually resides, subject to Section 6. No school committee is required to enroll a person who does not actually reside in the town unless said enrollment is authorized by law or by the school committee. Actual residence may be determined by looking at physical presence in the town with an intent to remain in the town and make it the applicant's home, often referred to as the center of the applicant's domestic, social, and civil life, close quote. Essentially, under the PSB enrollment policy, students are enrolled based on satisfactory proof of residency, with the exception of students who are homeless or attending under the METCO or employee fee-based programs. In response to your question, therefore, there is no maximum time before a student must be enrolled. If a student or their parent or guardian has established residency as provided under the policy, they are eligible to attend the PSB and should be enrolled. So based on that response, it sounds like we do not have any legal-based reasons for not continuing with a 3-month rule as written, but that doesn't mean that we cannot change it because of a policy consideration. So I wanted to bring that to the attention of this subcommittee so that we can have further discussion about whether we are satisfied with maintaining that rule as is, or if we would like to consider amending that. And we're also joined by Megan Geeney, who runs enrollment and registration. I know you've offered your opinion in the past on this, but if you'd like to remind the public about your feelings on the 3-month rule.
The 3-month rule as it's written, the only challenge that I find with the way it's written, if the committee so wishes to continue in this vein, is that it does not provide clarification on the term of those 3 months. Does 3 months of the summer count the same as January, February, and March, for instance, having students enroll for the last few days or weeks of the school year, or just for the first 1 or 2 or 3 weeks of the school year because they're departing shortly thereafter. The language is imprecise in a way that it's difficult to interpret for families clearly.
Andy, Valerie, any thoughts?
Sorry, I'm just still trying to digest what you read out from town council, which
I am as
didn't
well.
shed a whole lot of light on it, at least for me. Yeah.
David, did you have you didn't have a chance to look at the general law yourself, did you? Or did you?
I did look at it. So it's
Okay.
not it's ambiguous because it talks about rules promulgated by school committees, but it still does not explicitly state whether there's a minimum time period or a maximum time period. It's silent as to that.
The puzzling thing is how one avoids a situation where some children just have no right to a public education for some period of time. Like that can't be what the framers envisioned, but that could be the effect of what you read out if every school committee decided to make its own rules.
Well, I think it's also incumbent upon the parents or guardians, however, to say whether they intend to make a place their permanent or long-term resident. So if they come to Brookline specifically saying, we're only going to be here for a 6-week period, that's treated differently than if they say, we intend to be here for at least 6 months or 9 months or a year, in which case we would need to enroll them right away when they're here for even just 2 days. So it's also about the intent, and intent is what helps define residency. So I think in a situation where a school committee has left open the potential for a student to not be enrolled anywhere, that it would then be up to the parents to decide, well, we are neglecting our children if we don't declare a residency somewhere. We can't keep moving around like this with only 2-month stints from place to place. And that's where a child requiring assistance petition might be filed, or where the Department of Children and Families will potentially get involved if there are parents who are not registering their students by properly establishing residency. And again, there are other ways of getting students enrolled, even when you don't have residency defined by the most traditional means. For instance, we have a policy on homeless students, students in foster care. But I do agree that there's at least we're potentially making it more difficult for parents who do perhaps have a legitimate reason for why they would be somewhere for a 3-month period or less to enroll their children. But I think that becomes more of a policy question than a legal mandate question. That's at least what it sounds like from this answer from town council.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about it from a sort of a semi-equivalent domicile for voting policy, and college students can vote where they go to school, even though that's not where they necessarily intend to make their home forever. So I'm just wrestling with a little bit of inconsistency in some of our laws about what.
I think even in the college student example, usually a student's going to be somewhere at least for a quarter, probably a semester. So generally it would be 3 months or greater. So it sounds like we have direction from the district to at least clarify whether the 3 months refer to the calendar year or during the academic year. But the broader question for us as a committee is whether we want to amend that rule further and make it a lesser time period, whether we want to do away with that sentence completely, although we've heard in prior meetings that this can create some logistical difficulties and a strain on resources.
Can I ask Megan, roughly speaking, in a typical year, I mean, how many families are trying to enroll their kids for periods shorter than 3 months?
It's a great question. It's really difficult to give you a good answer for that. One, because the last 2 years have been so affected by COVID. They're not great examples, and they're, of course, the most fresh in my memory. And this rule has been applied for at least 5 years. As part of policy. So we have adhered to that policy. And it's publicly stated prior to people enrolling. So they may have considered it and then realized they didn't qualify for enrollment. So we don't know about the ones we don't know about. The only ones we find out about are those who are right at that 3-month time frame. Usually they say, well, we have a 3-month lease, for instance. Do we qualify? But those for less periods of time, based on the way the policy is currently written, we adhere to that as written as best we can. So we don't know how many others this might affect because they're not approaching us for enrollment unless they are experiencing extraordinary circumstances, in which case they may fall under categories like McKinney-Vento homelessness, protections, and other things like that. And of course, we are there to support those families through whatever they need and are entitled to.
Megan, was the clarifying question of us about academic year versus summer related
Yes.
students accessing summer programming or something different?
So it was not about accessing summer programming, actually. It was about the folks who are looking to enroll only for the academic year that they're here for. Hadn't, to be honest, occurred to me that families would try to enroll simply to access summer programming, which would be quite challenging for our service providers if otherwise we're not our students. They wouldn't know them to provide them those supports. But my question was more related to, should we be enrolling students for 2 weeks or 4 weeks at the end of the school year or at the beginning of the school year, only to have them immediately go through another transition?
Right. In other words, do July and August count toward the 3-month period?
Correct.
Because then enrollment might only be for September or it might only be for June.
Correct. And our school year usually doesn't go through all of June. Depends on the snow days.
Now, the way the language is currently written, it creates a rebuttable presumption that not being here for at least 3 months disqualifies someone from residency status. It does not affirmatively declare that 3 months or less will not count. It says it is presumed that if a student is residing here for 3 months or less, the student does not meet resident eligibility requirements. By writing it that way, that it's a presumption, that implies that there are circumstances where someone could still be declared a resident, even if they were present for less than 3 months. But I'm not sure what scenario that would be in. Can you come up with?
I mean, and maybe it's 2 months and 28 days, right? I mean, that gives some flexibility there. You know, or it could be a family experiencing some sort of extraordinary circumstance. You know, somebody who has been displaced in some way, but it does not meet the standards of homelessness. There's circumstances where folks kind of don't quite fit in either category. So that would provide discretion for supporting families should they fall into that in between. Perhaps they've you know, landed here due to an emergency medical treatment unexpectedly, and the child is here with them, and they don't know how long they're going to be here. Their intent is not necessarily to be here for a long time. That would be one example that I can think of.
So we are going to soon have a second read on this policy at the full school committee meeting. So hopefully we can get some clarity now, if possible, around what we would like to potentially recommend around this 3-month rule. But we don't absolutely have to. It's just because sometimes a full committee will ask whether we've discussed something at the subcommittee level. And now we do have more information from town council, even if we don't fully know what to make of it. We at least received a response.
Megan, do you have data, not currently in front of you, that you could get us on prior years before COVID, pre-COVID years?
I don't think I can because it would be far too anecdotal.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, I see value. You mean like sort of to try to get a read on what people would do if the rule were not 3 months?
Yes, or, right, if there was a way, if we had records somewhere, even if they're a hard copy of, at town hall of people who had contacted the office 3 years ago.
Well, I would move that before this goes to a second reading, we add the phrase during the school year to that sentence. And the committee can discuss.
Which, for that part, Andy, where are you adding the phrase?
Where I believe Megan is suggesting. So it is presumed that if a student is residing here for 3 months or less during the school year, the student does not meet resident eligibility requirements.
This is in section 1, the second paragraph, last sentence.
Does that is, Megan, what the ambiguity you're trying to remove, right? Yeah.
Correct. And then the emendation that the committee has added to have that appeals section added. So those situations would be eligible for an appeal based on the way that the appeals section is now added in, so that it could be adjudicated if need be.
All right, so I'll second Andy's motion to recommend that edit. Andy, your vote?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. Anything else on this policy while we're discussing it? Hi, Jennifer, just to catch you up real quick. We were talking about the 3-month rule around residency on the school admissions policy. I did receive a response from town council who essentially concluded that there's no maximum time before a student must be enrolled. So that was the new piece of information. And Andy just made a motion that we edit the language slightly to specify that it will be during the school year for counting the 3-month period. Was there anything you wanted to add, Jennifer, to the discussion on the school admissions policy about any part of it?
So you said that there's a 3-month maximum, or was there a minimum amount of time? I guess what I'm trying to figure out is how long can kids be unenrolled? If we're saying they can't enroll here unless they're going to be here for 3 months, what happens to those kids?
So it's if the parents, more broadly speaking, if parents do not enroll their kids in school somewhere by declaring residency or by enrolling them in private school, then the Department of Children and Families would very quickly get involved because the student is a truant. You need to be enrolled in school. But from the school committee perspective, we are apparently not required to, after a certain period of time, enroll someone if residency has not been established. So there's no minimum or maximum. It's about establishing residency, and residency is established in large part by declaring that you intend to live within a municipality's borders for a long-term period of time. And we as a school committee are defining that time period as at least 3 months.
So that's the difference. So where it's really not about, okay. So we're defining residency is really the issue. We're defining residency as you're going to live here for 3 months.
Right. And the enforcement would be more on the parents for not finding a long-term residency and keeping their children out of school. So that's still an issue, but it's on the parents rather than on the school system.
Jennifer, we did sort of have a discussion about whether keeping the 3-month rule would leave certain kids without any right or access to public education, which is not what anybody intended, I think. I think David was making the point that, yes, it is sort of up to the parents to at least declare an intention to remain somewhere for 3 months at a time. And if circumstances make that impossible, then our policy includes, it enumerates some of those circumstances, right? And there's also an appeals process for exceptions.
And beyond that, even the way the language is currently written, it creates a rebuttable presumption, which says it's presumed that if a student is residing here for 3 months or less, it's not an automatic that they would not be considered eligible.
Okay. I don't know. I feel unsettled about it. I don't know.
Would you feel more comfortable with a shorter time period, not having a time period at all?
It's just that I feel like so many things when kids are late to school, it's not kids unless you guess you're talking about a high schooler. It's really not the kids' fault. It's the adults who are responsible for bringing them there. So I guess I'm just concerned if we have kids whose families are moving them for a period of time, and that's the decision that they've made, what happens to those kids? It's, you know, if they can't register here with us, where will they go? Because they can't not go to school for that period of time that they're here. So what would happen to them? Where would they go? I don't know.
Generally, what would happen is if more than 2 weeks elapse and it's not an excused absence, the Department of Children and Families would intervene if they're alerted to it. They would probably remove the children from the home if the parents do not make some kind of arrangement. Then the children would be in foster care, in which case our foster care policy, which is based upon state and federal law, would take over. And then they would be eligible as foster care students.
I know, but then they won't be there with the parents, which is not what we want. So I guess what I'm saying is if you're a parent, say you're someone, you get like this amazing opportunity, you're going to come, you're going to be in the medical center, I don't know, whatever, come up with a situation where you're going to be here for 3 months, this amazing opportunity comes, you're going to bring your family with you, but you're not allowed to enroll them in school because it's a 3 month or whatever amount of time. I don't know. I'm just, then what happens to that kid? I'm just sitting in it from the situation of that child. What are those families' options, I guess, if they can enroll in Brookline? What do they do so that their kids don't go to, so that DCF doesn't get involved? What are their options? They want to educate their child, but they can't register them. So then what? I'm just playing it out in my mind. And I don't have a satisfactory answer yet to that question. So that makes me nervous. Does anybody have a good answer to that?
No, it also makes me nervous. I mean, I agree. It puts a lot of onus on not just the parents, but on the system actually identifying someone who is somewhere for a short period of time. And I'm not quite sure how DCF would find a student who we're identifying as being a short-term non-resident. So I agree, Jennifer, I have some hesitation, but I'm also wanting to weigh it with Megan's concerns about students being in for just a couple weeks of a school year.
I mean, I guess that I feel that like, I guess I do know how I feel. I'm not comfortable with the rule. I'm not because I understand why, as an educator, as somebody who, I understand why we would want kids to be here long-term. But we're here to think about what's also best for kids. And so I can't vote for something that's going to tell kids that they can't come, even if it's for short term. And it's a bummer if they're here for 4 weeks and then they leave. At least they got the 4 weeks from us. That's an unfortunate circumstance. It's not great for their educational continuity, but that choice is in their parents' control and not ours. All we can do is help the kids once they come here. So I guess I'm saying I'm uncomfortable with that rule, and I would not be able to vote for it in good conscience. I understand, and I don't disagree with the philosophy of the district about why they want to do that. Megan, I want you to understand, I get it. I know it's disruptive, but putting on my child hat, I have to say that I can't do that.
So if such a student were, for example, on an IEP, would all of that machinery need to kick in immediately, even no matter how short term the stay was?
Well, I think the team would have to convene a meeting, and then they would have to agree to an IEP. And then once an IEP is agreed to, then services would commence. I don't know. That's not my area of expertise, but.
Mm-hmm.
And
So the
they would have
process
to have
yeah.
a legal IEP to start with. Not all students who receive services, depending on where they're coming from, might have a full IEP. Not every country, for instance, follows the same process. So that could create complications for their timeline.
But if we're talking about a student who has an IEP
in
and
Massachusetts, for instance.
it automatically kicks in.
I do see your concern, Jennifer, and 3 months seems a bit long to me as well. Is there another time period with which we would feel more comfortable? For me personally, initially, when this came up, I was thinking more 1 month. Even that seems like a little bit of a stretch, but probably not the end of the world if a student were to miss up to a month, but 3 months seems like a long time. That's basically a full quarter. Go ahead.
Sorry, just, we teach the kids who are in front of us for as long as we have them, and we do the best that we can for them. And that's my philosophy. We do the best with what we have. And if a kid is here and they have access to public education, that's where I fall. I don't know that there's any amount of time that would be okay. I mean, on vacation for a week, yeah, and so I guess I do have a line. I do have a line. Anything like, I guess a month, a few weeks maybe is okay, because we're also not here just for someone who's coming on vacation to visit family for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks maybe. So I think maybe a month might be more comfortable for me, because that's a choice that people are making. I think what I'm trying to avoid is someone who's here for a several months sort of like internship or opportunity and is bringing their family, because that's a long time to be away from your family. Coming for vacation is a different thing to me. That's a choice you're making, a different choice. I don't know. Yeah, vacation. So I guess I guess I would say something along the lines of like 3 or 4 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, just to make it a round a whole number, not a whole number, an even amount.
So I would make a motion to further amend and clarify striking 3 months during the academic year and replacing with 4 weeks.
All right, I'll second that. Andy, your vote?
No.
Valerie?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
I'll also vote yes. Andy, though, I'm still curious in hearing your thoughts about why you voted no.
I just think that with these really short time periods we're talking about, really people should not be sort of uprooting themselves like by choice, I think, for that length of time and expecting their kid to sort of get the kind of education that they deserve.
I was curious by, I think I heard this right. Megan, are you saying that I think I heard you say that we've been following this for the past 5 years?
I believe that's when this policy was at approximately 5, might be closer to 7.
Okay.
My personal timeline here in Brookline. Yes, but
I'd be curious
for a while.
to understand a little bit more about the genesis of why this was put in place. I guess to understand, because I'm missing a significant amount of information around this particular policy, and the conversation that we're having about it intrigues me further as to what's happening with it.
So my understanding is, and I believe Helen spoke to this at the wider committee meeting a bit, because she does have that institutional knowledge about when this policy was enacted. I think she was on committee at the time. And I think also the response that David received from town council alludes to this, is families who are here for these short-term periods, these 2-month, 6-week appointments to work, study, travel, and they are coming to Brookline by choice as visitors to our community in some context. They were enrolling their kids in school, and the resources that requires of our teams in our schools and of our students is a pretty high price to meet appropriately for them. And so I believe that was the genesis of the concern that would have resulted in this policy being enacted. And again, it was in place prior to when I was in a role like this myself. So I walked in and it was there to apply. And I think it is just one thing I would like to note is that the enrollment process itself, in order to support our students, is not a one-day process. It does take some time for families to navigate through all of our service providers that are going to work with their children. Be that myself, they do have to prove that residency with documentation for all the other emendations we've discussed. But they may have to meet with our English language education teachers to make sure we have the right supports in place for them. They may need to meet with special educators. They definitely need to meet with their guidance team and their school teams to make sure that they're placed and supported before they hit that first day. So that can take a little bit of time, not a long time, but it does take, it eats into, if you're talking, a 3-week stay, we've already eaten into that time frame for them. So I just want not a recommendation, or I'm just providing that information for the committee's consideration.
Thank you.
Suzanne, go ahead.
The other scenario I can think of is we have a Ronald McDonald House or two in town. It's possible a family could be here for 3 months while their child is receiving treatment. And so I don't know what our responsibilities are for that family, and to the child. I mean, it may even be tutoring in the hospital or something. I mean, I could see that could happen.
I think that case is covered. Isn't that case covered by elsewhere in the policy? It's one of the sort of exemptions if you're here for a chronic illness in the family.
Yeah, we've certainly worked with several families over the years who are residents at Ronald McDonald House, and they have been enrolled when that was appropriate for their situation.
Okay, thank you.
And David, if I could continue answering your question a little bit, I think I didn't say it properly before. I mean, I'm just worried about creating the wrong incentives here. I think except for these certain emergency cases, like if you're going to be here for that short a time, really, you should not be encouraged to uproot your child and insert them into our schools for 1 or 2 months. It would be better to make other arrangements. So that's my worry.
All right, any other thoughts on this policy? We are going to discuss this again as a full school committee during the second read.
Can I just make a mention that this question, I think, is quite separate from the other edits that we've made. So it may be that this portion might require additional time and investigation and consideration from the committee as a separate matter than the other changes.
But I do think that's important for us to keep in mind because there is some time pressure to approve this policy in time for enrollment for next year. And we don't want something that is somewhat tangential to most of the changes we've made to hold it up.
I think it's an important discussion, but I think they're two separate conversations.
All right, so why don't we move on then to the next item? Thank you for joining us, Megan.
Thank you very much, everybody.
And that is discussion of draft policy to support students who are transgender and or gender non-conforming. Valerie, I understand that you had worked on the initial draft on this before you were a school committee member, and you're hoping that we can receive more staff input before considering a revised draft. Is that right?
Yes, staff and student, actually. When I reviewed what was drafted, there are already significant language and terminology changes that I would make to it just in a sort of first look at it. So I would definitely like to speak with staff regarding buildings, what their current shape is and what we could do with them, and also again with staff and educators.
Okay. Andy, Jennifer, or anyone else with thoughts on that policy? Go ahead, Jennifer.
No, I don't, I mean, I just want to, I'd like us to continue to work on it and get some more feedback on it. I think, you know, I've actually been hearing from more and more families that have an interest in this. So, you know, I'd like us to move to continue to work on it and get some more feedback. But I think getting more feedback is an important part of that process.
I agree. Having more input would definitely be helpful. So possibly within the next month or so, we can get that together. All right, so next up on our agenda is a discussion of a draft revision to the Foundations and Basic Commitments Policy. This can be found on page A3. Now, mainly what inspired me to work on revising this was actually this discussion around gender equity, but more broadly, equity for students with IEPs, equity for students on 504 plans, and also extending equity to access. It's not just about education and employment, but I think access to services. And that is missing from our Foundations and Basic Commitments policy. So that's the main addition that I made. So if you look at the second full paragraph on page A3, it now reads, therefore, the PSB is committed to ensuring that it is free from discrimination in education, employment, and provision of services by ensuring equal access and opportunity to all its students and employees. And then a similar change was adding a letter D to it is the policy of the PSB that no person shall be denied access and opportunity to services of the PSB based on her, his, or their race, ethnicity, color, religion, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, marital status, disability, veteran status, or genetic information. Do subcommittee members or anyone else have thoughts on this particular draft? Any other ideas for what should be included here? Potential modifications, anything at all?
I'm just thinking about the word equal versus equitable. I haven't landed on anything. It's just in my brain right now, noodling.
Right. I thought a little bit about that too, because equal in the most literal sense is providing exactly the same, but we have students who need greater supports for whatever reason. So that's not equal in the literal sense, but what we really mean is that we want to make sure everyone's provided for regardless of their demographic grouping. My one concern though with the word equity is equity can be interpreted sometimes very loosely. And I do want to make sure that we really are providing for everyone and that it's not just lip service. So I'm not quite sure where to land on that one either. Andy, Jennifer, any thoughts?
Can I ask, what are some examples of the services that are kind of in your mind in writing the new clause?
I would think mainly support services for students on IEPs and 504s. Because currently this policy talks about discrimination and it talks about employment, but it doesn't really talk about services that are received. And I think there's a difference between having an opportunity to learn in the classroom and an opportunity to receive actual services that are part of an IEP, part of a 504. And of course, I believe it's the district's intent to do that. But in a policy that is purporting to be the foundation of our basic commitments and not have a mention of that at all, I think is a hole that we currently need to fill. It depends on how broadly we construe the word education. But I could see some saying that services are not the same as education. For example, extracurricular activities. Some people have a very clear delineation that extracurricular does not count as education. And if you recall last year when we were working on the yearbook policy, is that included under education or is it not? And previously we actually did not have, we were not consistently at least providing support services for those in extracurricular activities. So I guess that would be an example.
Are we currently?
We do have a policy now on the yearbooks to help students on IEPs and 504s as necessary to fully be able to express themselves in the yearbook. And I would hope that this has been extended in other extracurriculars, but I don't have a comprehensive answer on that. Would be helpful if perhaps we could get a response to that question from staff. But as a policy statement, at least, and a foundation and basic commitment, I certainly hope we would.
I hope so too, but I would like to hear from staff on whether that access for extracurriculars is actually occurring.
I've taken a note there. David, in constructing, adding the language here, is the idea that wherever else similar language lists in our entire policy manual, is that also updated as a result of changes that we make, or do we have to take each one individually to make adjustments?
Traditionally, we've taken each one individually, which can be cumbersome. So that's something that we might want to switch. But I think the reason we haven't done it that way is if we automatically assume that updating one policy changes another one, there could be other implications for that. So I think that's the concern of making that presumption. But I'm certainly open to handling this in a different manner.
And I'm not suggesting it at the moment. I'm just trying to, learn some of our practices and then think about how we can be more efficient in updating across the board. Because as I'm reading through the manual, I'm seeing some things that haven't been updated, since the 70s. So there is much work to be done with policy in general. So I'm going to steal Val's word here and say I'm noodling about this right now, just thinking it through. I just wanted to get that clarity though.
Any other thoughts either to specific proposed language change here, making any changes at all? Anything pertaining to this policy? Jennifer?
So I think I'm okay with equal. I've been sitting here sort of thinking about it. I do think that, I don't know. I think that the way that it is okay. I don't really have nothing is really striking me as off with it. It seems okay. I don't really have much to add. I wish I had more to say, but it seems pretty straightforward. We want people to have equal access, but I do think it would be good to get some of the district feedback on whether or not there are any, to your point, any areas that are included in this policy that are not currently being covered. Is this something we're currently doing or not doing? It'd be good to get a little feedback before we vote, but I don't know, seems pretty reasonable. We're just talking about equal access, right? Equal opportunity. That sounds good to me. I like those ideas.
Andy, any additional thoughts?
Not additional, just what you were saying about, I think we need to be clear on what our comprehensive services is in this draft and what we're currently doing. Whether there's some unforeseen consequences of changing the language in such a broad way.
All right, so we can continue this conversation at a subsequent meeting, and hopefully we'll have some staff feedback by then. So next up on our agenda is a discussion of draft revision to the facilities development policy. And what motivated the changes to this one, the discussion on gender neutral bathrooms. I was trying to look for existing policies where we might be able to fold that in. There was a discussion I had with Superintendent Guillory, and we've had this discussion as a full committee at times about how sometimes it's better to look at existing policy before creating a new standalone one, if an existing policy can house a particular issue. So when I was looking through our policy handbook as a whole, it seemed that one potential place where we could address gender neutral restrooms and gender equity more broadly would be in our facilities development policy. I also had a discussion with Helen earlier today, since she's the chair of the capital subcommittee. She made some additional suggestions about some changes that she would like to see to this policy, not necessarily pertaining to gender equity, but to, for example, looking at heating and ventilation systems as a part of this annual review of whether our core facilities are advancing our broader educational agenda. She also suggested that the superintendent might not be the party who should be presenting to school committee this annual review of our core facilities, that it should probably be the facilities director. And that also it need not be annual, it could be as necessary. So the specific changes made in this draft in the F1A paragraph, which is the second full paragraph, I changed the guidelines may to guidelines shall also cover other core fixed infrastructure, such as that for technology, safety, health, IEP 504 plan accommodation, and gender equity. And then to the list of examples of core common spaces, I added locker rooms, restrooms, special education facilities, and nurses' offices. And then there's that suggestion from Helen to also add heating and ventilation. Any thoughts on this policy? Jennifer?
Just to the possible addition of heating and ventilation, are we also including air conditioning to that? Or lack thereof? Just, it's something we've been sort of keeping an eye on and trying to upgrade services when possible due to the extreme heat conditions for teaching and learning in the early fall and late spring that we've had. I don't know if it's global warming, just seems to be getting worse and worse and very hot and hard to concentrate. So I would be interested in adding that in just as an update. I'm not saying we need to mandate it for all spaces, but just something to keep track of as we have opportunities to provide upgrades. Can you also, David, in F1A, or maybe that's the second paragraph on facilities development, is that paragraph F1A or is that a typo? I'm not sure. It said you put in IEP/504 plan accommodation. Can you tell me what your vision was for including this in facilities? Do you mean like the spaces for teaching and learning for those accommodations, or?
Correct. I'm referring to spaces. So this policy as a whole is referring to spaces. So we do have, for example, rooms for students with sensory sensitivities, for example. I'm referring to those types of spaces.
Maybe we just, can we add, it just seems, maybe it's, can we just add spaces, or I don't know, in there somewhere? And gender equity, I understand you're talking things like gender neutral bathrooms and things like that, but maybe just flesh out that language a little bit more to make it so that people who read it understand that we're not talking about IEPs and 504 accommodations, but the spaces for that work for that work to be done. And spaces to promote gender equity. I don't know, something that lets people know that the focus is on spaces and not IEPs. And does that make sense?
It does. So in that sentence, I can amend that further to IEP 504 plan accommodation spaces and gender equity spaces, e.g. restrooms, in a parenthetical.
Is that acceptable to others? I just wanted to make sure it was clear what we were talking about.
So I guess my only concern with limiting it to spaces, and maybe this is otherwise defined in the broader F policy, are so technology changes, for example, or technology accommodations for performance spaces and things like that, that aren't the exact built environment, but that would, again, impact that sensory experience. Same with media centers, and I'm thinking, and libraries.
Do you have some other proposed wording that would just?
Yeah,
I wouldn't put technology spaces or health and safety spaces, but I'm just trying to. I just think it's a little too open-ended the way that we have it under specifically for the IEP's 504 plan accommodation. I don't know, because of the policy is a specific facilities policy. I don't know.
I'm sorry, what was your wording, Jennifer?
Oh, it wasn't fancy. It was just putting the word spaces after like accommodation and gender equity.
Could we say physical environment?
Yeah, I'm okay with anything in that range. I just think we need to clarify it a little bit.
It seems like what we're trying to say is something like, we want to be looking at core fixed infrastructure through various lenses, like technology, safety and health, IEPs, gender equity. Is that kind of what it's supposed to mean?
It is, yes. And the
not,
first
not that there's specific spaces devoted to gender equity, that sort of thing,
right.
or even to technology necessarily. So is there some dignified way to say that? Like from the standpoint of, and then list the various standpoints.
So it could be something like guidelines shall also cover other core fixed infrastructure through the standpoints of technology, safety, health, IEP 504 plan accommodation, and gender equity.
Yeah, or from the standpoints of.
Okay, from the standpoints of. I like that. I think that works.
I like that.
Can you just read it back one more time?
Guidelines shall also cover other core fixed infrastructure from the standpoints of technology, safety, health, IEP 504 plan accommodation, and gender equity.
Sounds good.
And David, where was Helen wanting to add heating and ventilation? Like, I thought it was to this list, but evidently not.
Well, no, to the list slightly lower on the page where it says art rooms, cafeterias, gymnasiums.
Oh.
The asterisk list.
Because that's a list of facilities, whereas heating and ventilation is something kind of more pervasive.
True.
Quality, right? Not or I don't know what to call it. But.
Would that fall under safety and health? I mean, because I'm thinking ventilation falls under health.
So how about a parenthetical after safety, health, including HVAC systems, close parentheses, and deal with it that way?
Just following up on, I think you said maybe Helen's other feedback was that it didn't need to be the superintendent presenting the report. Do we want to put the superintendent or their designee or something? I mean, I don't feel strongly either way.
I think that's good.
I mean, I think that the superintendent can assign who they want to present anyways. I don't think we need to put it in there, but.
So the superintendent or designee shall also develop and bring, and then leave the rest of it the same.
I think it's fine. I think it's okay if we don't put it in, like I was saying, I think the superintendent can assign that presentation to whomever they think is most appropriate, but just trying to incorporate everyone's feedback. If that was Helen's feedback, I'm okay with that.
Yes, as am I. So we can add that in. Any other thoughts? It seems to me like we are probably ready to move this one. It seems less controversial, at least for consideration to the full committee. And then we can engage in additional wordsmithing when we have this conversation at the full committee. So I'll go ahead and move that we recommend this edited version of the facilities development policy to the full school committee. Is there a second? Thank you, Jennifer. Your vote, Jennifer?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. All right, so next up on our agenda is a discussion of access to school buildings. Mariah had been asking Suzanne and I for a while now to bring this up as an issue. This has been a very important topic to many people for several years. Tonight's discussion is intended more as a freewheeling introduction to the subject, and we'll go into more substantive detail later. Hopefully, in subsequent meetings, we will hear from staff about what the practices were pre-pandemic, because we understand that during the pandemic, it's a different set of guidelines that we're going to respect for health and safety reasons. But longer term, we want to look at what our policy is around access to buildings. Traditionally, pre 9/11, for example, parents were routinely allowed to enter the school building. We pretty much had an open school policy that changed due to security concerns following 9/11 and school shootings. And there's been on again, off again, ongoing conversations about what would be the best practice moving forward. So I'd like to hear from other subcommittee members or anyone else about sort of your general thoughts on access to school buildings and the direction we should be going in once the pandemic is further under control.
I would like to hear from the community on this first. That's my inclination.
All right, so do we have, I do see that we have several members of the community who are on. So please raise your virtual hand and I'd be happy to have you promoted to, all right, to a panelist. Robin, can you promote Lauren Bernard as a panelist so that she can offer her opinion? Hi, Lauren, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and for giving me this opportunity to speak. I wear a lot of hats, as many of you know. I'm speaking under two hats right now, the first being director of an after-school program at the Ruffin Ridley School. I've been in this position since 2015. So when it was the old Devotion building, before that came down, and then we were over at Webster Street, and then we came back, when this building was finished. And I can speak from all of those perspectives. In the old building, it was an open door policy, but mainly after school programs used one set of doors or two. When we went to Webster Street, that was a closed door policy because the door was very close to the street, and the building was such a size that the building code dictated you couldn't have more than 515 people in the building, parents and students included. So parents started picking up outside. And it was understood that once we went back to the new building, that wouldn't be an issue. Now, I'm not going to speak on how I felt about this as a parent. I'm going to speak more about this right now as an after-school director. When the building is locked, as it is now, this presents, in my opinion, a much bigger safety hazard than a random person being able to get in. What we're seeing is children who get out of the building for whatever reason, they go have some playground time, they can't get back in. A child last week, she scraped her hand pretty badly in the playground and nobody would let her in to wash it off. We are directed by the administration not to open the door for anyone who is not in our program. I'm not even supposed to open it for parents picking up. They have to pick up outside. But we have things like injuries that happen. We have things, a child who's upset, a child who's lost, and they can't come in the building to clean up or just to get help. There was a fight on the playground one day last year, 2 years ago, a very serious one. Nobody could get help. The other thing is, and that's my issue with safety, is people are going to, and anyway, people who really want to get in the building, they're going to find a way. Either a child's going to be leaving from, a violin lesson, they sneak in, and then we have no record of who's in the building from a COVID standpoint. I think as an administrator of a program, it makes a lot more sense to have one door open and a sign-in sheet. And then we know who's in the building. So if there is a COVID problem, we can do effective, as a district, contact tracing. So that's the first point. The other thing is there are programs for which the doors get automatically programmed to open. There's basketball one night, there's catch ball on Thursday nights, and the doors are programmed to open. The people come in and then they leave. But after school programs who've been in this building for many years, the one I run since '86, don't have that option. It makes it extremely difficult for kids who come to a later class. For example, we run one session of classes right after school for an hour. We offer a second session of classes the second hour after school. Unless we have a child who signed up for both, we have to let in kids at say 4 o'clock. Unless we're dismissing the early kids and they're there early, they can't get in the building. It means I have to assign someone to sit by the door. I have to pay an extra person for a policy that I neither supported nor wanted, right? So it's a question of budget as well. And I'm about to start music lessons. I've put off offering instrument lessons for over a month now because of this problem. And now I finally have to offer them. I have so much demand, but I'm going to have kids coming for lessons every half hour. So unless I spend budget that I don't have, just have someone sit by the door, I don't know how they're going to get in. 2 years, in 2018, when we moved into this building, the doors were locked, I think until April. And then finally, the school committee decided to open them, or the school department. I had to refund $2,400 in missed lessons. I don't want to have to do that again this year. So I'm speaking from the perspective of as an administrator of an after-school program, both in terms of the safety, where I think the safety of not being able to get into a building hasn't been really thought about or examined, and also just the financial burden it puts on after-school programs that we have to, physically man the door with a whole extra person, a whole extra, pay by the hour salary that we just didn't plan for and can't afford, So I would really highly urge you to come up with something, either one door open with a signing sheet, some kind of code that parents can be sent, a temporary code for a week, a day, whatever. Kind of like a Zoom meeting, you get sent a link, some kind of situation where building access for after school programming is made easier, because this is not sustainable at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Any comments or questions for Lauren? All right, do we have other members of the public who would like to speak? Okay, Robin, can you promote Nicole McClelland?
There we go.
Nicole,
Hi.
go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, David. Nicole McClelland. I am in the middle of cooking dinner and didn't have any actual remarks prepared, but I just want to speak, since Lauren spoke as an administrator, just as a parent and a new parent to the public school system. We just started first grade at Driscoll School. She always pops in on town meetings. And I was curious sort of how David, I appreciate the background, how this policy kind of came about, because as I understood it, parents really used to be in the buildings. And I heard about that a lot at Driscoll. And I know there's sort of pros and cons to now not really having access to the buildings. But I would say one thing I've noticed, especially as a new family to the public school system, which is stating the obvious, is sort of this loss of community building that I think happens really organically when you have people crossing paths, and it's probably impossible to duplicate with sort of parents outside the building. And I spoke about this with Dr. Guillory, came to Driscoll a couple of weeks ago, but it's really those casual encounters with a teacher or maybe a specials teacher or an administrator, especially for parents that don't know anybody, that just aren't happening. So right now, if I want to be in touch with my daughter's teacher, it's really an email or a phone call. It's more formal, and it feels like the threshold for that should be a bit higher versus those really quick encounters that you have both with teachers, administrators, parents. So I would encourage the subcommittee to consider that. And also, if we are, I hope we don't move away from access to the buildings long term, but if we are, I think we would really need to consider sort of a study of how we facilitate and support communication between different teachers and different stakeholders in the school, and sort of how we're trying to replace what's been lost by removing that element of communication. So thank you for considering this and putting it on the agenda. This is a tough time for a lot of parents, I think, to be at meetings. And I will just say, I've heard this from a lot of people, at least in our particular school community, that they're really missing that community building sort of opportunity that's there when you have people with some access to the buildings.
Just in furtherance of that last point, I remember, Nicole, when I was a student at the then devotion school, my parents were allowed in almost at any point, and they wouldn't abuse of it. And I think that most parents didn't, but it was nice to have my parents get to know who my teachers are, even if it's just a friendly wave in the morning. And it was also comforting to me as a young student to be able to have my family come in and pick me up and see what I'm working on, or even if it's just something subtle like an art project that's hanging on a wall in the hallway.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of families are missing out on that today.
I will say, anecdotally, one thing that struck me the most is, we've had a couple of opportunities for particular reasons pertaining to our family to be able to meet some of the teachers and administrators. And I think most families haven't had that. And what I found is I'm sort of going into conversations with other first grade parents like, oh, this teacher's great and this person's great. And every single person back has said, like, are they? That's good to hear. I don't feel like I know our teacher. And I don't feel like I know, so-and-so, sort of whoever I'm mentioning that I've been sort of able to meet. Every single person I've talked to has said, like, oh, that's good to know. I've actually never had a conversation. We've had a quick listening session, which is good. And I think teachers are really trying to fill in the blanks, but they can't do it in the way that used to happen. So that's what struck me the most about that.
And just to answer one of your earlier questions about how our practices evolved over time. So after 9/11, some school principals decided to have more of a closed environment. Other school principals decided to retain that open door policy. And then when the pandemic came, pretty much all schools shut down to the general public. There was a communication that went out on June 18th of this year, of 2021, from then Superintendent Marini, and I'll read that for the public. And that's what set the policy that we currently have right now. So it was a decision by the superintendent. Dear PSB families, we were forced to suddenly change many of our educational practices and routines this past school year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of the changes implemented ultimately made our work more effective and efficient at schools, while others were necessary to maintain the safety of our students and staff. As we look forward to the 21-22 school year, school leaders will take the time to review these new practices with families and staff and to ultimately determine which of them should be continued in the future. One routine from this year that our staff found successful is our morning arrival and afternoon dismissal procedures and routines. In the fall, K-8 students will continue to line up in their designated line spots each morning. In some cases, students will enter the building through a designated door attended by a school staff member. Students will also be dismissed at their designated pickup dismissal areas in the afternoon. Parents and caregivers will remain outside during these transition times. The outdoor arrival and dismissal routines have shown to be extremely beneficial for students. Because students are escorted as a cohort by their teacher directly to class, we have found that we are able to start instruction almost immediately each morning, gaining significant instructional time. Additionally, with the exception of our youngest learners, we've seen that students can successfully navigate their way to class. We are confident that with time, practice, and guidance from our staff, we can promote a sense of reliance and independence in our students through this everyday routine. These procedures will also allow schools to ensure that their buildings are as safe as possible. Giving staff more control over who is in our school at all times will only shore up the safety measures we already have in place. In addition, this layer of security will also help protect those in our community who are not vaccinated and or vulnerable as we continue to recover from this pandemic year. School leaders are committed to continuing purposeful family engagement with our families. I believe that our outdoor arrival and dismissal routines do not erode the opportunities that families will have to engage with teachers, staff, and each other. There will also be ample events to meet, volunteer, and give back to your schools through open houses, PTO coffees, mystery readers, and other occasions. As we get closer to the start of the new school year, each school will message the details of their arrival and dismissal routines. Until then, I thank you for your support as we begin the work of planning for the year to come. Sincerely, James Marini, Interim Superintendent of Schools. All right.
Thank you for the background, David.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Oh, I just said thank you for that background, for that answer.
You're welcome. Do any subcommittee members have follow-up questions for Nicole or any specific comments before we invite any other members of the public to participate? All right, seeing none, are there any other members of the public who would like to participate? Please raise your virtual hand and I'll ask that you be promoted a panelist. All right, not currently seeing any. Do subcommittee members have any thoughts after this period of public comment?
There's another hand up in the two other hands up in the attendees, David.
All right, Robin, can you promote Salvatore De Agostino?
Hi, David. This is Connie Clausen. I think I didn't have a comment. I think I may have been erroneously tagged to unmute.
Okay. Well, you're still welcome to participate.
Okay. Could you say what you said just previous to this?
We're talking about access to school buildings in general and where we would like to, which direction we like to move in as a school community.
Yep.
You
know what, I don't have any really prepared remarks, but I would say that for kids who have communication challenges, especially for those who are lack verbal skills, I think it is really important that their parents would be able to have access to the building so that they could drop them off and pick them up specifically with a teacher. I would worry about a child who cannot communicate adequately for any reason, getting lost in a building, getting confused, needing to use the bathroom and not being able to communicate that, especially if they are dependent on like a sign interpreter or a communication device. And having that parent be able to be in the building with them, I think is key. Understanding, of course, the security concerns and the infection control concerns and all of those things.
All right, thank you. Mr. D'Agostino, if you would like to introduce yourself and provide comment.
Hi, good evening or late afternoon, I guess, feels like evening. Sal D'Agostino, 1264 Beacon Street, parent of a graduate of the Brookline school system and member of the town military equipment and surveillance committee. And so and also a subject matter expert in the area of facility access control, I guess, as well. And so just a few, I'm really actually happy to hear the discussion of looking at a post 9/11 set of policy for public space. So from a surveillance committee perspective, there is certain access control technology which the school system has as part of its infrastructure. I don't know that there's policy around that. It certainly would be nice in terms of this topic going forward for there be consideration for policy to be developed around that. Something that looks at an assessment of what you have in place, which is, I think it's on the order of about 80 cameras or so, as well as the current keys and any sort of electronic access control technology that you're using and sort of what's its state and what's its ability to meet your requirements as you reimagine access to your facilities. And so, as a committee, we're happy to help in terms of the policy and best practices that might be applied in some of this. And then, I'm just as a citizen, I'm happy to help in any way I can as well. So hopefully that's a quick introduction. Happy to talk more or move on to other people's concerns. Obviously, I'm coming at a slightly different perspective than many of the other citizens here, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Do subcommittee members have any questions for Mr. D'Agostino? All right, do you have an opinion that you'd like to give as to, sort of broadly speaking, the level of comfort that you would have or that you think would be safe with members of the public entering school buildings?
Yeah, I mean, I think, security is contextual. So you do risk assessments of different things. So one size fits all would be a silly approach to this. I think generally an open policy is something that's easily achievable and probably very healthy. With the previously stated caveat. It also, I think what you need to look at is where you need to restrict access in the schools and take the appropriate controls there, right? So certainly nurses, if there's narcotics in buildings, those sorts of things, right? But apart from that, the other space is most efficiently managed openly. And that also then comes into play the surveillance that you have in place currently over many of those spaces and the requirements for notice, which are currently lacking. So again, I would urge you to work with us to develop some policy around these sorts of things. So as you, and understand the current surveillance coverage that you have and how that will be related to this as well. And that people understand that access is access with surveillance in some cases, and maybe in some cases where it's not. And does that need to continue to be the case? Because some of these cameras have been up there forever.
All right, thank you very much. All right, another member from the public who had her virtual hand raised earlier. Robin, could you promote Victoria Jardis?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
We can, yes. Go
Okay,
ahead.
had taken my hand down. You can't see me. I don't know why. Oh, I take the, sorry. So I'm a parent of a 4-year-old at the Florida Ruffin Ridley School. She used to be at Lawrence, and prior to that, at Devotion was on Webster Street. So I apologize my mispronunciation of the school that got changed in so many names. But it definitely is anxiety it's caused me anxiety not being able to get into the school. My daughter does after school twice a week. But even during, school hours, but I understand the safety precautions. But I think Lauren brings up a really good point as a viewpoint from her as a, supervisor for that program, and having kids being able, to go inside for needs, to get help or a bandage or something like that. But I guess my point is, I understand that policies are in place, and even though my daughter's a half an hour late, I don't know where she is. I feel that she's safe. When I talk to the school, I know she's going to be out. This is not DASCP, so I apologize if I'm speaking about something that's not on the docket. But I know at my daughter's school, it's handled well. And Lauren's doing a great job. And I just want to say that to her point, it's very important what she's saying.
All right, thank you. Do subcommittee members have any questions for Ms. Jardis, or any comments more generally? All right, not seeing any at this time. Do we have any other members of the public who would like to speak on this issue of access to school buildings? Please raise your virtual hand if so. All right, looks like we do not. So subcommittee members or anyone else or school committee members, what direction would you like to go in terms of next steps here? Would we like to have someone from the staff report to us how we ended up in this current practice of closed buildings? Because it sounds to me, at least from reading that letter that went out from the previous superintendent, that it wasn't entirely based on COVID-19 protocols. That was part of it, but it was also about his perception of the increased efficiency and utilization of school day minutes by not having parents enter the building. But of course, that has to be weighed against what we've heard in public comment today, and a lot of our general perceptions about community inclusivity in the schools and what we miss when we don't have that. Jennifer, I see that you had your hand up. Go ahead.
I'd just like to hear more from the district about, where they see things at now, and, where they would like to head. That would be helpful. Do we have a particular policy about this that exists already, David? Or are we talking about constructing something new?
I think we would be constructing something new. As with our discussion around the facilities development policy, where I was looking at that as a place to maybe address gender neutral bathrooms, there are several existing policies that incorporate pieces of this, but I don't think we have a singular comprehensive one.
I think that there's a couple of pieces in here. Like there was a number of years ago, some training being done around building safety and intruders. And I don't know where that work is on an operational level. I think some of this is operational. I understand that there may be a piece that's a policy piece around what our intentions are, but I think I'd like to hear some more from the district about their plans and intentions and where they're at with this and the reasons for the decisions.
I would find that very helpful as well.
As would I. Any other, Suzanne, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's actually a lot to be looked at, and I'm not sure how much a policy would dictate. For instance, you know, when my children were young, you know, we went into kindergarten class every morning and read to, you know, a group of kids who would sit around, and that was all great, but that was before school started. So, you know, you could have things like a bell goes off, and that means, you know, all extra adults need to leave the building. It's time for, you know, the school to start. I mean, that, I'm not saying that's what we should do, but that's like a possibility. You know, the other thing to think about too are teachers available to have adults coming into their room, or are they running around trying to get the last minute work done before the kids start the day? So there's lots of pieces to this. And I would think that we would want some input from certainly building administrators and also from parents on what kinds of compromises can be made so that families feel welcome, and but it doesn't interfere with starting the day and getting the day going. So I don't know who would do that kind of legwork for us, but I think it's important to think about the different possibilities.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I guess, but for me, before embarking on a long investigation, I'd really want to know what the administration is looking for from the school committee, if anything, on this issue. You know, whether it's seen as purely something for the superintendent to decide together with his building administrators, or whether like a full-fledged policy from the school committee is what's wanted, or something in between. I don't know. But where some things are set by policy and some latitude that is sort of explicitly left to discretion. If we haven't previously had a policy on this, why now?
Well, I think the why now question, at least from the perspective of several members of the public, is that previously it appeared to be up to each individual school principal. Some schools had the open policy, some schools had more of what we have today on a system-wide level. And a lot of parents, as we heard this evening, feel frustrated that they are no longer, they feel they're not as integrally a part of the school community like they were in prior years, and they miss that. So I think that's why it's becoming more of an issue for us to at least allow people to be heard. Doesn't mean we're necessarily going to do anything formal with it. But I think as a general matter, I like to hear from the public to know what people are thinking, what their desires are, what their frustrations are. And if there's a way for us to help in concert with the district, then I would certainly want to ameliorate those concerns. Suzanne?
Oh, sorry, Suzanne.
No, just say quick. I was just going to say what you said, David, that the practice had been different at each school, and people found that somewhat frustrating, because it's like, is it a safety issue or isn't it a safety issue? Is it an efficiency issue or isn't it? Or why can some welcome families and others feel they can't? And so, you know, I think they were looking to school committee and administration to kind of figure this out in some way that is helpful to many, many needs across all our schools.
Go ahead, Valerie.
I just wanted to add that in addition to what Suzanne listed as things that I think we should look at, it was referenced in Dr. Marini's letter and also by at least Nick McClellan, which are the community building pieces and what those sort of alternative community building, how that's going this year in particular, with COVID and with sort of stronger safety measures around infection control, and what the district is doing around that community building piece.
I see that Lauren would like to speak again. Robin, if you could promote Lauren.
Hi, thank you again. The question was asked. I just wanted to add another piece of the puzzle. Why would you consider having a policy, speaking to Andy's question? rather than have it be sort of discretionary for each building. And I think another thing you really a lot of our after school directors would like you to consider is that there's a financial aspect to this. You know, if it forces us, if there's a policy in place, either set by a principal, either set by the school committee, that puts a financial onus on an after school program, I have to raise tuition to pay for an extra member of my staff to hire somebody else to sit by the door. Extended Day just had to do it. When we were at Webster Street, I spent $30,000 over 2 years to have a full-time receptionist at the door, right? I'm after a year and a half of not running, most of us have no reserves left in our budgets for this sort of thing. And that's why I think a policy is needed, because we have to plan financially for these sorts of things. If I have to raise tuition again because I have to hire another person, I need something based on policy, right? So I think I'm speaking for other after-school directors too, is we would like to see a policy that applies to all buildings, all schools, that's consistent. You know, I've stated the one that I would not like, or I would rather have at least one door open, but regardless, we need something so that, you know, we can actually plan fiscally from year to year. You know, we run businesses in the school. We have to be able to plan for staffing. It's not all feel good for us. You know, we would love to be able to build more community. As a parent, I very much want, I loved having that in the school building. I would love to have better relationships with the parents in my program. But in terms of a policy, I think that has to be a consideration too. It really affects our budgets. So I just wanted to leave you with that thought.
Thank you. All right, any other comments from the public on this topic or from school committee members?
David, can I comment if there's no members of the public?
Go ahead, Mariah, and then Jennifer.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead, Mariah.
Thanks. So I want to apologize if I'm repeating things that other people have said. I had to I had to deal with something else while people were making comment. But I just wanted to say that I think that there is a real tension here that we possibly have pushed too far on in the current practice. And I think it's part of what Nick alluded to, Nicole McClelland, about really sort of the impacts and the damage to community and community sentiment that happen when we don't allow for those sort of more informal encounters to occur. And I think that it's really important for us to think about what is the type of school communities that we want to have. And that's not necessarily a decision that we make at a building level, because we want to have these community, you know, this sort of formative policies in place about the kind of communities that we want to have and the kind of interactions that we want to foster. And so I really think that it's important that the policy that we end up coming to at the end really supports this level of community engagement and interaction, and thinks about it specifically also from the least members of the community, whether they are children who are younger, children with communication disabilities or other disabilities, and how we're making sure that we're supporting the children, you know, for example, children who are English language learners. There's many different communities and subpopulations within the buildings that will benefit from this, and how we think about supporting them, and the impacts, what we might be willing to forego, whether it comes to this in terms of staff convenience, in support of individuals and communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I was just going to say that it seems like there's a number of issues interwoven here, some before school, during school, after school, some with different goals and purposes. And so I would really like, if it's possible as a next step, to sort of hear from the district what their vision is for this, so that we can respond. I mean, there's some piece to this that's operational, you know, and then I think it would help me to understand if this is an operational piece or something that needs to be codified in policy.
All right, anyone else? Okay, seeing no further comments on this, we can move on to our next agenda item, which is a discussion of next steps on review and revision of the restraint and seclusion policy. So on this, what I wanted to update subcommittee members on is that work is currently being done to review current practices. There is a commitment by the district that has been expressed to me to, at minimum, ensure that our policy is in alignment with state law on this. And hopefully we'll be able to take up more formal revisions that go beyond minimum requirements in the near future. But I also wanted to docket this item in order to allow members of the public to offer their thoughts as well as other subcommittee members. Go ahead, Valerie.
I just want to clarify, are we amending here to at least meet the minimum state standard? Or are we awaiting a document? I would like us to at least amend to, I don't feel comfortable being out of compliance with state law for much longer, really for any amount of time, so.
Right. I would like us to, at minimum, amend to state law, absolutely. I've been trying to be respectful of staff preferences around the precise timing of when we do this, but I don't see any reason why we could not proceed with at least updating the policy to meet state law. And then if we decide to offer beyond the minimum, perhaps that could be a more in-depth consideration that takes a little longer. But in terms of meeting state law, we really should do that post haste. Any other thoughts?
I agree. That sounds good. That sounds like a reasonable plan to at least amend to meet state requirements, and then after that point, have a further discussion about what we want to do here in Brookline.
All right. Would members of the public like to be heard on this? Please raise your virtual hand if you'd like to comment. All right, seeing none, we can move on to new business. Is there any new business? Jennifer?
Actually, I'm not sure it's new. I think it's new old business. I just wanted to come back to the conversation about looking at our policies in a somewhat systematic way where we're trying to update those old policies. Actually, Dr. Guillory sort of mentioned this, touched on this. It's something we've been working on over the years. Do we have I'd like us to think about a plan for how we can maybe make some progress on that this year.
I believe that each of us was assigned a section of the policy manual to look at over the summer and kind of bring up anything that struck us as needing updating.
Right.
So is that is that the plan?
Yes, I think we should go ahead and continue with that. So Jennifer, my recollections, you had anything that's curriculum related, which makes sense. I don't recall off the top of my head what you had, Andy.
I think it may have been staff.
Okay. So whenever any of you are ready with your section, you can let me know and we can docket that. I think I've been working on finance and I'm still coordinating on and off with Mariah about when we'll have a joint policy finance meeting, because I actually did do the full fiscal D section and I'm awaiting current staff input. I had input from Mary Ellen and there was a little bit of input from Mariah. I don't have input yet from Sam, but that should be ready to go in the not too distant future.
So I'm not sure if it was Dimitri who was on this committee, but I was never assigned. So if there's a section you need to assign David, let me know.
All right, will do.
There is someone with a hand up now. Connie seems to be back.
Okay. Robin, can you promote Connie to panelist?
Hi, thank you. I'm sorry, for some reason I got disconnected from the meeting and had to rejoin. So I just wanted to offer a comment about the restraint policy. I think that first of all, my name is Connie Clausen. I'm the chair of the Brookline CPAC. our focus for this policy is really about the safety of all concerned. You know, staff, students, the people around us, and also just being able to be in compliance with federal regulations and state regulations, as David noted. We're happy to partner with you on this. It's a very complicated topic. It's a very emotional topic for a lot of people, and it's a very necessary topic. We need this policy. It's not something that can be done away with. We have to have this. We have to give the staff the ability to keep all members of our school community safe, including the students that we work with. And we need to not put them in a position where they are fearful of repercussions for not following the proper procedures. So it is really important that we clarify what these procedures should be, because our internal procedures are out of alignment with external ones. So that's kind of our thought for a short-term solution. You know, we would really like to take a broader look, and I agree wholeheartedly that we have a strong commitment from the district to take a broader look at practice and implementation of these policies. And I think that is, you know, always in everybody's best interest, but it's not going to be something that happens overnight.
Thank you. Do any subcommittee members have questions for Connie or any comments? All right, thank you very much, Connie, for participating. So we'll go back to new business now. Is there any additional new business? Jennifer?
No, I'm just circling back to the other old new business that I brought up. So I was just looking, there's A through K sections in the policy manual. So I'm going to go through I, which is instruction.
Okay.
There's a lot of sections. And I see you, David, you said you were doing D, fiscal management. Is that right?
Yes.
And then Andy, did you say you had a section? Do you remember what section you were working on? Was it negotiations or no?
I think it was staff, but I need to go back to my notes.
Okay. There's a personnel section, students. Okay. I was just trying to see what our system was. So I'll go through I, and then I'll bubble up anything that I think. I just want us to avoid having policies that are last visited in the 1970s, which is a thing. So,
Yes.
okay.
And then also while we're each going through our respective sections, and I'll find something for you, Valerie, and you can also look through, and if there's something of interest to you, just pick that section. And while we're going through it, if there are policies that we think might not be relevant at all anymore because of state or federal law changes, then we can also propose eliminating policies. We did some of that last year and earlier this year. And that's something that we should continue to do, because we do have a rather bloated policy handbook that includes a lot of policies that we never even really look at or refer to, and our procedures are not in alignment with them. So to the extent that we can be more efficient with our policies, I think eliminating makes a lot of sense.
David, how is our current policy manual connected with the school committee manuals that they provide districts as well?
So some of our policies are based off of MASC drafts, and we use those as sort of the default that we work from, and then we might tinker with aspects of it and add some of our own clauses. But that's only the more recent ones from maybe the last 5 years or so, where we're going off of draft policies. I would say that a majority of our policies actually do not tie directly to MASC policies. Something that I like to do when we're addressing any policy is look at whether the MASC has a version, and oftentimes I've found that they do not. Now that doesn't, to me at least, that doesn't necessarily mean that we should abandon what we have. For example, last year we looked over a policy in the instruction section actually about how we decide on grouping of students. And we had a very thoughtful discussion on it where we had multiple principals present how they group students. And I think that our ultimate collective conclusion was that it was a really good informative policy and the community liked it, so we kept it. So there are some instances where an older policy, reviving it a bit just to be relevant to the present times can be useful. So we don't have to necessarily get rid of everything that's Brookline specific, but something that clearly no longer applies, I think that we should move in the direction of deleting it or incorporating it into other existing policies, and certainly looking to the MASC for any current issues so that we know what they've come up with is helpful, and it is a practice that we've been following in at least the last couple of years. Andy?
Yes, I'm looking back at the minutes that Robin took for our June 14th meeting, where it says the subcommittee discussed possible policy areas to focus on during the 21-22 school year. Suggestions included the following: student dress code, attendance, hiring committee composition, and site councils. Members agreed to assign a section of the policy manual to each member for review and recommendations. Finance, Mr. Perlman. Instruction, Ms. Monopoly. Students, Dr. Lewis. I got wrong what I was supposed to be doing. And personnel, TBD. So that's where we landed at the end of last year.
Mm-hmm.
So Val, I guess if you're the TBD on that, if you want to do personnel.
Sure. I'll take personnel.
Any other items under new business? Okay, seeing none, that concludes this evening's meeting. Thank you everyone for participating. Thank you members of the public for offering us your thoughts. That's always very helpful. Thank you to the staff who participated this evening and to the school committee members. And our next meeting will be in December. And that date is December 13th at 5 p.m.